Summer Session number 2. For this session, we're going to start with just a minute of tuning in to this present moment with some nice, calm breaths. You don't really have to change the breath unless it was very excited, but maybe dial it back so it's a little calmer, if that's where you're starting from, or just tune into what you're feeling right now in the breath. You can extend that to sensations you're feeling right now in the body. Make your posture nice and stable and balanced, but also soft and malleable, like a lump of clay. You can start feeling the paper under your hands, or if you're holding a pen or pencil or marker, and start becoming aware of the layout of what you want to draw or what you intend to create today. The design I'm using today is this hummingbird with some simple lines and dots for some easy warm-ups. And I'm going to start with those nice and simple lines and dots, just to warm up the wrist and the fingers. I'm not going to worry too much about making a straight line here. I'm just going to embrace the line I end up with. And I'm using a marker to give myself a nice, thick, colorful line. But you can also use pencil or pen if you like. This hummingbird design may look complex, but it's actually composed of a bunch of fairly simple shapes that you can follow along with, like this triangle for a beak, with a line through it. And I'm just going to go in and do this little bit in orange now, just because the pen's in my hand. It's just a few little circles and then petals. Very simple flower. And for the bird's body, I'll do the outline. So we have this half oval or squared off oval shape for the head that you can outline. It has a little line dividing it color-wise. And then the body's basically a big round circle with this little cylinder of a tail. If you're following along without the design from the journal that I'm using, you can try and do this as true to what I'm doing, but you can also just embrace the shapes you create today. You can do a line here for its wing. This is a very abstract kind of hummingbird, so as long as you get something close to this, you're in the neighborhood. We can do some petal shapes here. They're also kind of suggestive of feathers. So we have this kind of fun, abstract shape that's somewhere between a feather and a petal. Especially since we have bigger and smaller ones. I'll do a couple of these lines in between. I'm not going to do every single little design in this because I am trying to stick to 10 minutes. I'm just going to try and get the biggest sort of shapes down. If this were a normal day, for me, what I like to do is define the shapes and the palette that I want to use, like I'm doing here. And then I'll kind of come back to it throughout the day. So I'll do this short 10-minute session in the morning at some point, and then just leave this by my desk. And any time throughout the day as I'm working my regular person job, I can come back to this and just do a little coloring, just to give my eyes a break from my screen, give my hands a break from the keyboard. That's the joy of having a job where I can do this right now. But maybe this is something you can adapt for your work environment somehow. Or save it for the break room if that's available to you. So I did some of these more petal shapes, and I'm comparing the pink in this pen to a pink that's in one of the papers I want to add to this crafty part later. These petals are kind of almost square. They almost, to me, look like little bits of cut paper, or like those thinner sticky notes that you see sometimes. I use them all the time to bookmark parts of books I want to try drawing or come back to make notes from. They are very detailed though, so this might end up taking up the bulk of my time here. Maybe I should have picked another way to go about these, but I do like to finish, if I do start doing a design a certain way, to keep going with it, even if it ends up taking more time, just so I have a little bit of cohesion. Because if I'm leaving parts of this unfinished, having some sort of symmetry or repeating patterns makes it look a bit more complete in its incompleteness, if that makes any sense. So I'll continue with these tabby tabs. And for the sake of this video, I might just speed up the rest of doing this so that you can get an idea of the end product and you don't have to wait till the end of my workday to see it. Or maybe I can get some of my markers and pencils to do a bit more heavy lifting for me in other parts so that they take less time. The nice thing about working with multiple forms of media, like pens and pencils and markers, is that they can overlay in different ways. Like the markers tend to sit on top of everything else very well. So if I want to go in and just shade this in pencil, as long as the marker ink is dry, it should just kind of nicely shade in those parts, and then the marker parts will still stand out. But then if I wanted to go back and do more detail with marker later, that could also sit on top again. Again, I'm not doing both lines of each petal because right now I just want to describe these big shapes. So I'm going to come in with some red here and fill out this flower. And maybe you can get a sense of what I meant by that incomplete completeness. Every shape is still defined, even if it's not perfectly filled in. So this is a way of being mindful of the entire sort of composition as you're working. I'm going to use some yellows here, again, just to do some heavy lifting for me. If I wanted to go in and do some more shading or lines, that's always still available. I'll just have to use slightly darker or more pronounced colors to get those little lines in there. Using soft pencil shading and then some hard pencil lines is a great way to do that. And we've come up to the 10-minute mark, so this is where I'm going to speed things up. Again, just to give you an idea, I'm using some markers again just to fill in all these little areas. You don't have to speed up with me. You can always just kind of wrap up whatever part you're on and maybe decide what you'd like to come back to, what you'd like to leave for later. Or you can always just pause the video before we get to the writing prompt. But for the purposes of this video, I wanted to get some more of this in, like these soft shading with the pencil and then a bit more line on top of it, just so you can see how some multimedia layers can be created fairly quickly. This latter part of the video only took about 4 more minutes, but you're seeing the extra quick version, and there we go. Now we can transition over to the writing part. Again, we'll just check in with our breathing and our posture again. Just taking a few moments to tune in to how we're feeling, maybe give a little stretch here to connect with our body and connect with the page. Maybe start underlining the prompt if you've got that in front of you. If you don't, you can maybe tune into other present moment experience like senses, what you hear and see, smell and taste and feel in the body and against the page. So now, this prompt. What habits are the most important for you to keep doing when it's hot out? How can you make that easier on yourself? With prompts like this, I sometimes like to grab some different colors, again, usually sort of mimicking what I did in the art part so that it gives it some cohesion. And I like to sort of pick out keywords like hot out. That has to be red. That's the nice thing about having sort of something to trace over like this, is you can play around a bit more like this. If you're following along though, you could just write out the full prompt in a light gray and then trace over it in a more striking color. I'll pull out the word habits here too. And now that I'm thinking of it, I'm just going to jot down cardio, since that's been on my mind. Getting more of that, and especially when it gets hot out, that's the thing I like doing the least. So, how can that be easier? The other nice thing about these color connections is I can write the easier methods in orange to connect it there. I'll use this purple for most important, so I can think about a bit of a hierarchy. I might end up writing more habits than just the most important ones, but I'd like to bring those forward if I can. And now I'll start filling in the rest of this, just with a nice green, since that's the bird's base, so it's going to be the base of this too. Kind of the way that some birds have a sort of base color and then some highlights. I'm using the same kind of idea for this prompt to give it some striking plumage, if you will. that pun is a bit more funny if you know that we used to call writing instruments, we used to have writing instruments with a feather because the tip was a good writing point, and une plume en français is a feather. So I think it does show up in English though in some things, like I think plumb lines might be related to that, unless that's more to do with plumbing the depths, and there might be a common Latin root word for that. But I digress. My mind wandering right now should be wandering over what habits are the most important for me to keep doing when it's hot out, and how I can make that easier on myself. So, cardio. My least favorite form of exercise as an asthmatic. I suppose staying hydrated would be the most important way to make that easier on myself. And there are hotter and cooler times of the day, so I could try and do it earlier before it gets too hot out. And if it is too hot out, I can dance inside where it's nice and cool. I'm being mindful of the edge here, where I might want to put some tape later, because I do like making boxes around these prompts with tape sometimes in the collage part. So I'm going to leave myself that option. Also would like to stay on top of my garden watering when it gets hot out. I actually have some plants that are kind of meant to show me if things are getting a little too dry out there. I have some little pots with some Collage plants that should tell me when it's time to water stuff. But that's also something I can do early in the morning before the wasps get too active. And that would certainly make it easier, less trepidatious for me to water my patio garden. Another thing I'd like to make sure I get more of this summer are garden salads. That way I'm pruning back my lettuces and getting tomatoes when they're nice and ripe. Eating healthy, but also keeping my garden healthy with that. And for that, I could bring a bowl with me when I go watering. So you can think of connecting some of these habits to each other too, maybe. Making some habit daisy chains, where one thing sets off another. I could bring some jugs with me when I go out for my water spikes too. I just have some bottles that I stick in the ground upside down so that the capillary action can keep them nice and moist. And to make that easy on myself, I could do a couple each day. So breaking up big tasks into smaller tasks is always a good way of making a habit just a little easier on yourself. It's, I guess, the difference between a habit and a task. A habit is something you do a little of each day, whereas a task is a one and done type of thing sometimes. So, speaking of watering things and it being hot out, I have been getting in the habit of rinsing off my clothes in the spots where I sweat, just so I don't have to do a full wash if something isn't fully dirty. Doing a little of that every day has been keeping my clothes clean, but also it's a lot gentler to just rinse off your armpits and crotches in the sink than it is to put things through a washing machine that's jostling everything around and moving around. So that's a weird habit that I have, and I'm sharing with you now. And I also, to keep things nice and cool when it gets hot, I want to keep my bedroom cool so that I don't have as hard of a time sleeping. I have some nice thick drapes that, as long as they stay closed, does keep that room pretty nice and cool by blocking the sun. Which does make me think of another habit that I'm going to have to start getting into, or I guess set of habits, is my night routine of making sure I'm cool enough before I try going to bed. Because otherwise I will toss and turn and be up all night. So I've over the years developed a few habits for cooling myself down before I try and sleep. One of the main ones for that is to just go run some cold water over my wrists and maybe soak a towel, face towel, and pat down my neck and my armpits, because those are areas that get very hot. Definitely the neck before the armpits, though. That's kind of key. That's a big help for me to cool down before bed. And there we are. I'll switch over to the crafting side of things now. And again, just tune back into where my breathing is right now. Maybe it got a little excited while I was thinking of all these hot habits. I can just become aware of that and let that settle back into something a little bit more calm before I move on. I can become aware of my posture again, making sure I'm stable but lumpy like soft clay. And tuning into my environment again. Whatever sounds I hear, the feeling of this page, and start thinking about how I want to lay things out, maybe. I sometimes like sticking things in animals' beaks, but I don't know if that's going to be available here. So I'll pop up my other shot here and set myself another timer for 10 minutes for some collaging. So I think maybe I'll just put this... No, that one doesn't work either. All right, maybe I'll just put the flowers together. And maybe I can gate them in as if they're part of a little garden. When I'm collaging, I try and think of making layers of things and sort of interactions between stuff. So I like that layout. And I'll start by just getting some glue tape on this. Can help to start with the biggest pieces. That way there you know you have room for them. And layering from biggest to smallest is usually going to work out a little bit better unless you have something that's transparent that's going to kind of sit on as an overlay. But for any solid opaque objects, it's good to start with the biggest object and then go to the smallest. And I'm lining that up with my edge there for my writing prompt as well, because I'm going to connect these things with some tape so I can make some separations that are still kind of cohesive and connected in some ways. I like that. Now, actually, I should start in with my tapes before I get into any stickers. And it'll have to be one of the small ones up top. Maybe I'll go smallest to biggest. Give it a little sense of weight. I like using these decorative tapes on the horizontal lines and then sort of sealing them in with, I have some solid colors that have a bit stronger glue in that tape. So another important consideration when you're layering things can just be the different strengths of stuffs and how layering is going to affect how well they stay in. It's always a game of wins and losses with this crafting, because creating layers necessarily will involve covering some things up. So we have to decide which things we want to keep in the frame. I think I'm going to mimic my color scheme here with my vertical bars of tape. I could oppose them, but sometimes I think when you're trying to match up colors, it helps to have them side by side with each other, because if they're too far apart, sometimes that connection doesn't always show up as obviously. But sometimes you can stagger them just one apart, and that will create a nice sort of sense of cohesion. I think the important thing is that both things are viewable at one glance. So with a page like this, most things should be fairly viewable. I'm gonna stick this little rough edge back in just because I wanna. I'm creating a couple little areas of overlap with these tapes and papers. Not huge ones this time, but I do like having some slight layering because the opaque and colorful aspects of the tape interact in a way to create a bit more interest. And actually wondering if I should add a little green to this for the sake of my little hummingbird and that unfinished tape edge down there at the bottom. And I have these flowers that have green stems. So maybe I'll go get that now. Fortunately, everything's fairly close by in here. And that will pull out some more of my theme in green, since that is one of the main colors I've been using here. I don't think I have one that matches it perfectly, unfortunately, but I think this will do in a pinch. And I like the way that goes with the pink. Has a very faded vintage quality to it that works with this, I think. So, did want to kind of connect this, but I do want this flower underneath it. So, again, just to check in and be mindful, anytime you're picking something up or placing something, it can help to try and keep yourself from getting sucked too far into a single detail. It's just occurring to me that I might want the butterflies to interact with this flower a little bit, or layer against it a little bit. And I'm trying to be mindful of the stuff that might be covering up too. Like the top of my little bird's head, or these petals that have colors that are mimicking the tape, or some of the colors in my design. This has a fairly clear spot here where it won't be covering up too much. And la pièce de résistance. Ou est-ce que c'est si résistance? I always forget how that expression goes exactly, or where it's from. And just as a final thing, because I know this green tape can be a little finicky and want to come off, I'm just going to stick it down with some clear tape. There we go. I'm happy with that. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see you again. The music today was from the lovely Lofi girl, and I've been adding these to a playlist called Lo-Fi's to Live By's, so if you want to keep playing that music, you can do that through there. Thank you for watching.